Awesome. So, hey everyone, I'm Jessica. I've told you a little bit about myself so far, but I recently started a PhD program at the UW, and I've been working on the IPP demonstration sites project. So, I've been working and learning a lot about inclusion and what it's like in Washington and really kind of all over. And I've been getting to do that with Christina Novak, who's here with us. If you saw her UDL presentation yesterday, that's probably why you're here today, because Christina is awesome. I think that yesterday was really cool. So I'm excited to kind of continue on with things that feel pretty linked to UDL. I think that a lot of inclusive practices, when done individually, are pretty great, but when done together really makes them more effective and meaningful. So Christina and I are kind of going to go over the nuts and bolts of things. And then we've asked Sarah Morgan to be here with us today to tell you what it looks like in her school. So that's going to be pretty cool. I think that we have the nuts and bolts side, but then the real life side of things, which I think is going to be kind of where it's at in our presentation today. So thank you, Sarah, for being here. I'm excited to hear what you have to say. So I want to start with master scheduling. It makes the most sense for me to start with master scheduling, go to co-planning, and then go to co-teaching, because master schedule facilitates time to co-plan, which then facilitates an easy co-teaching time. I wanted to kind of pull up a picture of a master schedule to get a picture in your brain first. I read that a master schedule forms the rhythm that every person in the school community lives by, and that looking at a master schedule is kind of like looking at an MRI of the school. And I'm typically not one for metaphors, but that really did click for me, kind of helped me conceptualize that the master part of the schedule is encompassing the entire school community. A school's master schedule is a vital but really often overlooked system that affects what students learn, who teaches them, and who they learn with. Master schedules encourage collaboration and common planning and prioritize all students' learning in the general education classroom. A good master schedule often considers the services of students who qualify for special education first. This can be a shift in thinking and practice for schools who have a history of scheduling services for students with disabilities after that schedule is built. I know that it's kind of hard to start things that way, but it often in the end makes things a lot more effective. So let's see, why are they important? The schedule is a function of what we're trying to create. It's the foundation of building an inclusive school. Without an inclusive master schedule that supports all students having access to core content, general education, and the multi-tiered supports that everyone needs, we continue to reinforce special education as a place instead of its truth. A service that supports students' access to general education through specifically designed instruction, accommodation, and universal supports. Cassie Martin says it all the time, that inclusion is a culture shift. It's a social culture shift. It's not, it's not enough to just put a kid in a place or to think of this idea of inclusion as a place or as a service, or it's more than that. It goes beyond that. And it really kind of rests and lies in our biases and our thoughts and then the way that we carry out our instruction and how we build our systems. Possible outcomes of a master schedule. So when you have a master schedule in place that considers the needs of all learners and of all educators, it opens up a ton of options and possibilities for collaboration and opportunities to shift attitudes concerning what it means to be an inclusive school. So one of what I consider to be the most important part of a master schedule is that they create and protect common planning time for educators to engage in their learning community, ask questions, share knowledge, collaborate. That allows for more frequent progress monitoring, interdisciplinary lesson planning and designing, and more responsive instruction. It increases access to engagement in core content because all All students with special education services are present in the general education classroom for both instruction and application with the supports and services they need. We talked a bit yesterday in my small group about there's all these needs and so much asked of you as an educator. And we only have so much time and so much knowledge and so many resources in our own brains. But right next to us often is a whole nother educator with a whole other set of ideas and experiences and knowledge. So you have this resource often right down the hall from you. But with what time, right? So your time is hard to manage with the amount of stuff that you have going on. So a master schedule doesn't just set aside time and like really build it into your day, time to meet and collaborate and plan with that resource and that person, but it protects it as well. I've heard a principal tell me, like, I protect that co-planning time for my teachers. If there's anything that is prioritized, I try my best to prioritize that. And if that means I go into the classroom while the students are doing art time, or then that's what that means for that day. So that was pretty interesting to me. Master schedules should be developed in response to the needs of the students, not because it's convenient for staff. So there you can build upon those classes and services to imagine how you might use them in a more flexible manner to support all students. So you're maximizing resources and creating equitable opportunities in classrooms. Services should follow student need, not necessarily be tied to a classroom. So a master schedule allows for this because it can provide consistency across grade levels and or content areas. So structures and supports can travel around the school with that student. Something I want to stress is that when common planning time is built into a master schedule, it allows for more frequent data analysis protocols. So educators are being really responsive to what their students need, and they shift supports and services accordingly. So I can't stress enough how important it is to have a structure and a system in place for those common planning times, like I was talking about a second ago. When a master schedule supports this kind of very important work, it's critical to take full advantage and use those opportunities to build very inclusive and equitable systems. When making changes to a master schedule, there can be some pushback. Everyone has a role in making the master schedule work. It takes collaboration and commitment from all educators and support staff. Everyone has a role in delivering a master schedule that works for all students. This can require a change in mindset about how special education services are delivered. And it sometimes requires thinking outside of the box and about resources and how to utilize resources and staff in the school. So it requires a commitment to strong tier 1 instruction in order to provide that really high quality instruction for all students. Like I said earlier, inclusion is a cultural initiative. So in order to truly include all students, we need to reframe our thinking and practices around teaching and learning. So McMicken Elementary has really spent the last few years reconceptualizing and rebuilding their master schedule. They wanted to better support all the students in their school. And this was kind of one of the first steps I think they took in doing that. They have served as a demonstration site for the IPP project I was referencing earlier. So we've asked Sarah to come share with us the journey and kind of paint a picture of that master schedule in motion, bumps and all. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to her. And I'm going to ask you, Sarah, do you want me to stop sharing or leave it on the PowerPoint?
Leave it on the PowerPoint is great.
Great.
Just let you know when to go to the next slide.
Sounds good.
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Sarah Morgan. I am one of the resource room teachers at McMicken. And I'm really excited to be here today to tell you about our journey. Just a little background. I have been at McMicken Elementary. I just finished my 6th year, and we just finished our 5th year of kind of this overall inclusive journey that we set for ourselves. Just so you have that background knowledge, we kind of go through this, and then later in the presentation, I'll kind of break down what we did in each year. So I don't want you to think we just are doing all of this year one, because it is a lot of work that you have to build up to do. So that's a little background there about our inclusive education at McMicken. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So at McMicken, we really started with going to some trainings, myself and another teacher who was dually certified. So she was teaching gen ed at the time, and she was also a special education teacher. We really kind of sought out, we kind of wanted to see what co-teaching was about, how we could bring in these inclusive practices to McMicken. And so then we came back to our admin, and they had been wanting to do this for years as well. And so we created a vision together. So all the stakeholders in this, at McMicken, we have 2 LRC, that's our learning resource room teachers, myself and another. And then we have 2 self-contained behavior classrooms. So those teachers were part of this, our admin, and anybody else we found needed to be starting this from the ground up as well. So we created a vision. So the vision we came up with is that we wanted to create an inclusive culture wherein we truly own all students and collaborate in order to design and implement a rigorous, accessible, and equitable instructional program. So our goal was really what can we do to support all students in our school and really have an inclusive culture, no matter what room, hallway, wherever you walked in our building. So the first thing we did was kind of laying the groundwork. And as Jessica was saying, starting the master schedule can really help, because if without the master schedule, we would not be able to do any of this work. And so really creating that master schedule is going to support inclusion and co-teaching. And without it, it's really challenging. So the main thing is really having your admin on board. So really sharing your vision with them. We found it really helpful to have all of us sit around a table and have us go around and explain what our vision was for inclusive education at McMicken. And that really helped us to create that vision together. But really having your admin support is essential. So what we first did was create our master schedule. In that master schedule, we knew that we needed it to support co-teaching and support intervention blocks. So at McMicken, you'll see a picture of our master schedule here in a minute, but at McMicken, we have intervention blocks. So there's 30 minutes for math and 30 minutes for reading each day, Monday through Thursday. On Fridays, we don't have the intervention blocks for various reasons, but Monday through Thursday, there's a 30-minute reading or ELA, 30-minute math. And really the point of those blocks was to create an inclusive environment. So the students that still needed to be pulled for special education services would not be missing core content. That is our number one thing, is we did not want students to be missing core content at all. So during those intervention block times, every student in that grade level is receiving something just at their level, whether that means they're on our iReady is our individualized learning program online. They could be working on that. Students were with their gen ed teachers in small groups, with our para educators in small groups, and with our special education staff. So at that time, everybody in that grade level is getting what they need. And really, again, the support behind that was the students with special education would not be missing core content. And then another thing we really focus on at McMicken is implementing research-based practices. So really creating a lot of tier 1 support. So we use a lot of PBIS strategies at McMicken, really making sure those are accessible to all students, so it's inclusive, and using really strong MTSS and RTI models. And so we just really boosted up those so that we could talk about students individually, so we could figure out how they could get everything they needed in our inclusive environment. And then supporting our students' needs success groups on here. It's the same thing as our intervention blocks. We just call them success groups. That's what we call them to the students. So really just making sure that the students are getting what they need outside of core. So really having strong intervention blocks. And then our admin really thought it was important to turn over a lot of that professional development time. So turning a lot of our staff meeting time to what they call DAP, which is data analysis protocol. So for those intervention blocks, in order to make sure they are successful for each student, about every 6 weeks, we do a DAP. So we analyze data, informal data that teachers have taken, as well as data from iReady, our online learning program, and make sure that students are still in the correct group that they need to be in. So it's always a flexible model where students can be moving in and out of groups within their classroom, as well as some grade levels do groups with all the gen ed teachers in their classroom. So it might mean that if I'm ready to move to a different group, that now a different gen ed teacher is me teaching that group. Also, our groups are flexible with making sure that as a special education teacher, I'm not only teaching students with IEPs, that I'm teaching students with IEPs, but then also students that are working on those same skills in gen ed can join my group and vice versa. Students that have IEPs don't necessarily have to come to my classroom to receive their services. If there's a group that fits them better in the gen ed class, then they would stay there for those services. So our intervention blocks are very flexible and very driven by data. We have inclusive PD. In the past, a lot of special education teachers, ESAs, so counselors, SLPs, OTs, really expressed that a lot of PDs at school and the district didn't have much to do with them. And so really making sure that our PDs were inclusive for our staff as well. And then our school also does release days, which as every grade level gets 3 release days throughout the year. Which is in the fall, winter, and spring, so that the team can come together and really just do some unit planning, some strong planning to make sure everybody's on the same page. And in those times, the teachers really talk a lot about those intervention blocks as well and getting students what they need individually. And all of our staff is part of this work. When we did start initially, it was just myself and another that other teacher that was doing co-teaching. But over the years, we've really tried to boost this up, that every person at our school is a part of this, whether you're co-teaching or not. Our school is inclusive, which means every member of our staff is a part of this work. And we do that through visible learning, our PBIS systems, our community partnerships. Those just really help us to boost up that inclusive environment at McMicken. So kind of the have-tos for master scheduling is special education services does drive the master schedule. So we make sure we have those success groups, those intervention blocks, so that it would be awesome if we could co-teach all students at our school, but because of staffing, that is not possible. So there are still students that are pulled for those small groups. So making sure that those intervention blocks are in there so they're not missing core instruction. And then making sure that the grade levels we are co-teaching with, are able to do that with the LRC schedule and then with the gen ed schedule. So that really drives the scheduling. And then at our school, our admin is very strong on making sure that everybody in a grade level has the same common planning time. So, and then with those 3 release days throughout the year as well. So really strong PLCs at our school, making sure that they're always collaborating. They have time to do that every day. And then 3 times a year to really dive even deeper. And then we work with district departments to make sure that our additional staff can support the needs of the master schedule for co-teaching, inclusion, all those things. So we really utilize all of our outside of classroom staff to support this inclusive vision.
Sarah, those 3 release days, could you tell me a little bit more about those?
Yes, so at our release days, the teachers have subs for the day, and the teachers come together, and then myself or the other LRC teacher attend. So we get a sub as well, and we attend with them. So there are the general education teachers, resource room teacher, and one of our admins. So either our assistant principal or our principal attends those meetings. And at those meetings, it's kind of the grade level team gets to decide what they want to do, but most of the time they'll focus on ELA in the morning and then math in the afternoon. And within those times, they structure really unit planning. So the unit planning is done for until the next release day, so that during the common planning times throughout the week that they have, they can talk more about the nitty-gritty daily planning, but they have the overall unit plan, so they're on the same page. And like I said before, a lot of that time is really focused on how we make sure each student gets what they need during instruction. So they're really great days where you can just come together, not have to worry about the students because you have a sub in your classroom, and just focus on the planning.
Cool. Thank you.
Yes. So building a master schedule, this is the way we do it at McMicken, and I know a lot of other schools do it this way as well. So our assistant principal, she's very organized, and so she's kind of the main one behind the master schedule, but at your school, it could be the principal as well. And so what she does is she looks at the support staff first. So she looks at recess, lunch, specialists, all of those things that need to be plugged in first based off what's allotted to us. So she'll plug in those and make sure there's enough coverage with our paraeducators for those, for recess and lunch. And then she looks at the intervention blocks and sees what classified staff or paraeducators are available at those times and not at recess or lunch. And those paraeducators are then assigned to intervention blocks. So at those intervention blocks, there are going to be at least 2 paras for each grade level, for 2 for ELA and 2 for math. And sometimes there happens to be more. It just, if the intervention blocks for grade level is around recess or lunch, it's just more challenging to have more classified staff because there's more supporting recess and lunch. But she makes sure that there are at least 2 paraeducators for each intervention blocks to really support with pulling more small groups. At McMicken, we do have our paraeducators pull groups for students that are at benchmark or above, and we have our general education teachers and special education teachers work with our students that are not quite at benchmark yet. And then she goes ahead and looks at PE, art, music, so all of our specialists, and sees what FTE we were assigned for those, and what, if we have somebody that's 0.5, what hours they will be there, and then she plugs all of that in. So once she has all of the recess, lunch, intervention blocks, and specialists in, she then comes to the special education staff. So first she'll come to LRC, as we have the most students on our caseload and different unique situations we need addressed in the master schedule. So then she'll work with us to determine what grade level we need to co-teach with, how we're going to make sure that works with our schedule. So making sure that when we're co-teaching, there aren't too many intervention blocks happening at that time, so that we have enough staff to be co-teaching and doing blocks at this intervention blocks at the same time. And then she goes and discusses with our EBC, our behavioral special education staff, to make sure that where they're going to co-teach, it also works with their schedule. And then she really decides and lets classified staff know which intervention block they will support. And then after all of that is done and kind of the main bones of the master schedule is finalized, she goes to the grade level teams and asks them where they would like to teach their content blocks. And they kind of get to decide, do they want to teach ELA in the morning or math in the morning? And do they want, and you'll see a visual here in just a second, where do they want their intervention block for math, right after their core instruction for math, which most of our teachers want that because it makes sense. But so then they kind of have a say in where they want their content blocks in the master schedule.
Hey, Sarah, we have 2 questions in the
Yes.
chat. I think you'll be able to address in your next slide. But the first one is, how many classrooms are being supported during each intervention block? And the individual sharing that they have 4 classrooms at each grade level, K2, that requires support. And the second question is, what does this all look like for individuals who are on modified curriculum?
Okay, yes, so I will definitely address that with these visuals here. So most grade levels have their intervention block at the same time. You can see here in this visual that 4th and 5th grade, every year we have 2 grade levels that band together. Generally, that's to support our behavior classrooms, because those special education teachers need, say most of their students are in 4th and 5th grade, they need those intervention blocks to be at the same time in order to ensure they can co-teach. So it's kind of just like that nitty gritty master schedule planning, but every year we make sure that 2 grade levels are band together. It could also be that they're band together because of a split. So if we have a split classroom, we might need, so next year, for example, we might have a split classroom in 2nd and 3rd grade. So those grade levels are going to have intervention blocks at the same time. But other than those 2 grade levels, every other grade level has intervention blocks individually for that grade level. So at our school, we have about 3 to 4 classrooms in each grade. So that would mean in 1st grade at 9 o'clock, they're doing their math success group. So that would be, there's 4 classrooms that are doing math success groups at that time, as well as our special education classroom is opened up at that time for 1st graders in math. And so then our paraeducators, kind of depending on what the grade level wants and what works, might be spread out 1 per teacher. But then it also might mean that the team, if there are not 4 classified staff available, maybe there's only 2, then those 1st grade teachers would come together and say, okay, we want the paraeducators to pull 2 groups. This group's going to work on, decoding, and this other group's going to work on comprehension. What kids from your class need to join each of these groups? So really, it kind of depends on if it's going to be a paraeducator supporting each classroom or a paraeducator supporting the whole grade level to teach groups. So yes, our grades have 2 to 3 or 2 to 4, really 3 to 4 classes per grade level. And then for our students for modified curriculum, if they have modified curriculum in their IEP, if they are in a co-taught classroom, which most of our students, if they have modified curriculum at McMicken, are going to be in a co-taught classroom, then their curriculum is going to be modified. That's what co-teaching is all about, is making sure each student has access to that. So we also we have self-contained classrooms for behavior, but we do not have in our district, they're called IAC, our Intensive Academic Center, and then ILC, Intensive Learning Center. And those, we don't have those self-contained classrooms at our school, but those kiddos would be more of the kids that would have modified curriculum. And so we don't run into that as much as other schools might, just because of the classrooms we do have at our school. But we do have students with that in their IEPs, and that is addressed through co-teaching. So as you can see here in this visual, the blue is the intervention blocks. So you can see up here, some grade levels, first and second grade decided first and second grade decided they wanted to have math as their first success group, and third, fourth, and fifth decided they wanted to have ELA as their first success group. So again, that's kind of giving the gen ed teachers some choice in that. We just, our assistant principal is really great at making sure that everybody is kind of a part of creating this master schedule, and you're not just given your schedule, that it works for everyone. And so then the other picture here, which I think is on here, Jessica, if you go to the next slide, you'll see the afternoon here. Will you go back one slide?
Yes.
Thank you. So you'll see the afternoon. Oh no, this is another year. So this is another example. This is when we had sixth grade at McMicken. And you can see here when we co-teach in a grade. So this year we co-taught, the year that's up here is we co-taught in second, fourth, and sixth. So then the co-teaching for that grade has its own column to make sure that we know when the co-teaching is happening. So each grade level has an intervention block for ELA and math. And if they're co-teaching, we make sure, if we're co-teaching that grade, we make sure when that is happening is on the master schedule. Go to the next slide. After the master schedule is created, myself and the other LRC teacher, we go through and create LRC 1 and LRC 2. So we create our schedule and make sure that all works to make sure that we are available, at least one of us is available for every intervention block. Sometimes we need 2 or 3 staff at those blocks, depending on how many students we have that qualify in that area for each grade level. We do have a paraeducator as well now. What you're seeing up here this year, the year that's up here, we did not have a paraeducator. So now we have typically when we do this, we have LRC1, LRC2, and then our paraeducators. We have 3 schedules we're working with. So as I was saying, we make sure that with our paraeducator that 2 of us are available at each intervention block, so we can have more groupings to support individual needs. And then we make sure that we plug in all those blocks and then make sure that we are available, the other person's available then to co-teach. So this is all, again, the schedule is based off the master schedule. Once that's complete, and we kind of plug it in and make sure it works for us. If for any reason something did not work, and say our paraeducator was on a break, needed a break at a specific time, and I was going to be the only one available for an intervention block because the other LRC teacher was co-teaching and it just doesn't work for us, and we needed 2 of us at that intervention block, that's when we go back to the drawing board with our assistant principal, look at the master schedule and see what we can do. And then sometimes it might be, and you know what, we're going to give LRC another paraeducator at this time because you need more support for different groupings. And so sometimes our assistant principal supports that. So we plug it all in, make sure it works for us. If it doesn't, we go back to the drawing board and kind of are flexible in how we can make sure it works.
Sarah, another question in the chat regarding paras. What type of training do they receive, those who get to work with groups during intervention block?
Great question. So our district hosts some PDs throughout the school year. Every year it seems like more and more, which is great, so that they feel supported in running those groups. And then our school, I believe it's every Friday. So we don't have intervention blocks on Fridays. And like I said, for various reasons, one of those reasons being that paraeducators can come together and receive some PD on how to run those intervention blocks. So between our principal, our assistant principal, sometimes myself, sometimes a gen ed teacher, if they have a specialty in something they want the paraeducators to be taught, we come together, and there's about 45 minutes to an hour every Friday where they receive some instruction on whether that's how PBIS strategies, how to really make sure that the behavior is locked down in those groups so that they can teach. Sometimes it's on reading intervention strategies, math intervention strategies. So it just kind of depends on what paraeducators have asked for, what gen ed teachers have observed that they might need support in. And then we just figure out what staff is going to teach them that. So there's a lot of support for our paraeducators.
All right. So I actually, before we move to questions, I want to say it would be so convenient if I could just hand over a template and say, okay, here's a template for a master schedule and an outline on how to do it. But nothing is that simple and nothing is really that convenient. So I've met with a lot of schools that do it differently. They all just kind of prioritize the same thing at the onset. So your process might look different, but usually your priorities are going to remain the same, which is all students in gen ed, protecting co-planning time, those things that we chatted about. So what I can't hand you is a template, but what I can give you are some other resources on people explaining how they came up with their master schedule and their process. One being Chase Middle School. They have a really awesome deep dive video that's available, and PowerPoint that's available on the IPP demo site website that Christina could maybe drop in the chat. Heather was the vice principal at the time, and she has a really math-brained person, and really goes deep into her process of how she creates the whole master schedule for their school. And even has a big magnetic whiteboard that she uses to schedule and move things around and see. So it's a little different than other people, but it might work for you. So now I think before we move into talking about co-planning, I think it'd be a good time to get some questions. I know you've thrown some in the chat, but if there's anything you have before we move on, feel free to unmute or to put it in the chat as well.
And I know we have some other experts in the audience, so if anyone wants to share how they've done master schedules, feel free to pop that in the chat or unmute.
That would be cool.
Question about co-teaching. We will get to co-teaching in very shortly. And then, have you done this with a preschool team? If so, what changes? Sarah does not work with preschool team, but we have preschool teams that are part of our demonstration sites. So we can certainly get a hold of a master schedule and put that in the drive on how preschool is working with master scheduling. Co-teaching will address shortly. And Sarah, wondering what your caseload size is.
Yeah, so at LRC, as I mentioned before, there's another LRC teacher and myself. So we really, again, are focused a lot on inclusion. So we have separate caseloads for paperwork purposes, but really we work with all the students. So we have typically about 45, anywhere from 45 to like 52 students on our caseloads before we hit that overload mark for special education.
Thank you. And let's see. A lot of people here from preschool, which is great. I'm going to drop the link in the chat again. If you're interested in setting up any types of visits with our demonstration site schools, you could go to this link and schedule a type of visit, you know, in person or virtual, depending on the COVID guidelines of each district. So we can set you up with those resources and create those partnerships. Let's see, we have someone sharing that they work in a school with significant needs and more resource model IEPs and 4 classes per grade. So Ruby Bridges, Kathy Davis from Ruby Bridges is willing to share her master schedule. Thank you, Kathy. Kathy, you can email that to me and I can put it into the shared drive. Someone's asking, out of 45, how many are on IEPs? Oh, thank you for answering, Sarah. Any more questions about master scheduling?
Okay, we can keep looking at the chat, but let's go ahead and move on.
That's good.
Into co-planning.
Okay, so before we get into co-teaching, we're going to start with co-planning. As we've learned through discussing the importance of building an inclusive master schedule, we want to make sure that dedicated co-planning time with teaching teams plays a crucial role in creating equitable educational opportunities for all. So we're going to share with you some important features that we'd like you to keep in mind when co-planning. So what is co-planning? So to help with framing, let's remember that not all co-planning models look the same. Master schedules will dictate when you plan, how often planning occurs, and with whom planning occurs. Just like Sarah was sharing with us, they do unit planning every so often where they get release days to do so. And then their more regular meeting is to dive into the nitty-gritty details of the week. That's a very common example. That is something that I used to do in my school sites, and it worked really well for our team, but it might not necessarily work for another individual's team. So co-planning is the act of teaching teams getting together to plan proactive practices that seek to meet the needs of each learner. During co-planning, collaboration between educators occurs to design curriculum for all learners in preparation for the first teach. If you went to my session yesterday, we did a lot about UDL, and so I'm going to continue that pattern today. But when I mean first teach, we really mean like oftentimes educators will plan for the average or like the norm of the class, which might mean that you'll have to do a second teach, which is sort of that on the fly, I'm realizing that it's not going well and I need to address the learning gaps that are happening. So when thinking about a first teach and only a first teach, it's great to use UDL strategies rather than, like I mentioned, the lesson being developed for a norm group of students. and adapted after the fact, which is differentiation. So it's through effective co-planning that personalized learning needs are integrated into collaborative planning tools that assist educators in determining effective instructional practices and documenting progress towards those goals and learning targets. So why is co-planning important? First, co-planning sets the stage for co-instruction and co-assessment by bringing together the perspectives and expertise of multiple educators to consider student needs, strengths, and learning goals. Remembering what Jessica highlighted in the beginning, that it takes multiple people to plan an effective lesson, because like our students, we as adults and educators, we all have our strengths and areas of growth. I was a high school special education teacher responsible for co-planning and co-teaching, co-assessing across multiple different content areas. So you should have seen my face when I'm told that I'm now responsible for co-teaching physics, algebra, English, and history. Those are not my areas of expertise, but you know what I am good at? UDL, understanding student strengths, understanding how to address stretches using student strengths. And then I rely on my co-teacher to bring that content area expertise. And together we form an expertly written lesson plan. Eventually, of course, I'm learning from my teacher about all of this content so that I can effectively co-teach alongside down the road. So like I just mentioned, secondly, co-planning allows for teachers to draw on different individual strengths to plan for a variety of students. One educator planning a unit or lesson may bring particular area of expertise regarding content knowledge, while another educator's expertise may be in ways to increase student engagement for a wide variety of learners. So while planning, it's important for each individual to share the load and be responsive to agreed upon deadlines. Your co-teaching, your co-planning partnership will not work if, let's say, and have the responsibility of coming up with these parts of the lesson or getting the materials ready by class. You need to have that trust there that involves, meeting those deadlines. It was never an effective co-planning session if we both showed up, for our hour-long meeting on Monday and none of us had what we needed to co-plan, and so we end up just chatting about things we were stressed about. Like, that's not an effective tool for co-planning. And what are the outcomes? So when co-planning, the most important outcome to remember is that following co-planning, the teaching team should walk away with lessons or units that integrate flexible layers of support, that integrate other related services, strategies, and goals. They provide accommodations, options for differentiation, and above all else, are equitable using a UDL lens. So like Sarah mentioned, they realize that they can't do all of what's required of them in like an hour session. So they've adapted the practice of mapping out the unit where the whole team comes together. The unit gets mapped, and then in individual planning sessions weekly, they can go through the process and outline who's doing what materials are needed, and more importantly, who's teaching what, which we'll get into our co-teaching piece. Yeah, next slide. So important things to remember, as briefly mentioned in previous slides, it's important to remember that team members share their expertise in the planning stage to support all learners in Tier 1, remembering that all students are general education students first, and we need to be putting together those practices that assist students in reaching their goals right away. Secondly, team members should use co-planning time or a frame template to focus on their work strategies used and expectations for the session. You don't want to be that individual, or maybe you are very gifted in the fact that you can remember most things. I am not that person. So using a template is going to be very important, not just for you, but for your co-teacher and for other related service providers. We have, think about all the other related service providers who would love to know what's going on in your classroom. so that if they are in a position where they need to poll a student, they can relate what they're doing in their session to what's going on in your class or the weekly unit. So keep that in mind. Make your planning document accessible. Thinking about like your English language learner teachers, speech therapists, occupational therapists, physical therapists, PE, specials, all of those individuals who might not get to be part of co-planning time often. It's a great option to have something easily accessible to other members of your school team to help build that content knowledge. And so you want to make sure co-planning is captured in writing. This ensures that the lessons remain universally designed and limit the need for on-the-fly accommodations later. So if you're doing a lot of this from memory or like notes in the margins of your notebook, that doesn't ensure that your lesson will be universally designed. And it definitely creates a situation where you're going to be scrambling to support students that are falling behind. That also indicates that you might be losing instructional minutes while scrambling to put accommodations in place. It's 100% the right thing to do to scramble to put accommodations in place, because we know not all lessons work the way we intend them to work 100% of the time. So just keep that in mind. So additionally, through written lesson planning, co-teaching models are discussed which includes when each individual will be doing and what they'll be doing through the scope of instructional time. And we'll get into that a little bit later, but that could mean like at the beginning, maybe it's like one teach, one assist, and then we move into station teaching. So all of that gets planned out in co-planning time. So again, just to reiterate, it'd be great if your co-planning document could live in somewhat of a virtual hub so that there's an easy one-stop access for you to have access to your tools, and then all team members can access the document at any time. Right, so we're again so grateful to have Sarah with us from McMicken. So I'm going to pass it off to her to talk a little bit about how they tackle co-planning. And again, this process will look a little different at various levels, but expectations should be similar throughout all of the co-planning partnerships related to, speaking your truth and building that relationship and that trust. Preschool teams, I know there's a lot of you here today. Think about your co-planning maybe through a lens of maybe station teaching is a really effective strategy for preschoolers. But right now, Sarah, I'll pass it off to you so you can speak to what's been happening at McMicken.
Great, thank you. So this chart here is something that we created at McMicken just to ensure that all the things that we need to think about for co-teaching happen. So really thinking about the co-planning is really where a lot of that lives to ensure that everything runs smoothly. So one of the things when we started co-teaching that I found really helpful to really think about is I didn't want to go in the gen ed classroom and look like an assistant, or the students didn't see me as another teacher. I wanted them to walk up and say, I need to go to the bathroom, and ask me just as much as they're going to ask their gen ed teacher. So really making sure that they viewed it as two teachers of the same level from their eyes. So really then all of that came down, we talked a lot about, well, then what does that look like for co-planning? If we want the students to see us as having the same thing, same job, and the same level of teacher, we really want that to go into the co-planning as well. So there was a lot of planning that went behind that. So prior to the school year starting, again, kind of going off that master schedule, but making sure you know what time of the day you'll be co-teaching as well as co-planning. So having that common planning time. There have been some years where having that common planning time with the co-teacher and then the special education teacher, the other co-teacher with that partnership. It's been a little finicky just because my schedule is very different than a gen ed teacher's schedule. So sometimes it's a little bit harder to align that common planning. So there have been some years where we set like a specific couple days in the week after school where we would do the co-planning. It just kind of depends. Some teachers have also preferred that they planned after school where they could just turn their brain on to planning rather than, and they wanted their planning time to kind of prep the next activities for content. So it kind of will just depend on you and your co-teaching partnership. And then deciding how long you're going to plan for, how often that planning is going to happen, where and where that's going to happen, how you're going to communicate. So if there's something that comes up last minute, so for example, in my position, a lot of times behavior comes up throughout the day. How am I going to communicate if I'm running late to co-teaching, or how am I going to communicate to my admins to say, can you come take this over because we are prioritizing this co-teaching? So just really thinking through all of those things and those methods of communication really help to have co-teaching run smoothly. And then especially from a special education perspective, just really making sure that you're familiarizing yourself with the curriculum. So whether that means a gen ed teacher's in a new grade level, or it's maybe a grade level I've never co-taught in before, just really making sure I understand the curriculum before beginning co-teaching for that year. And then determine how you're going to do your planning. So where is it going to live? And I'm going to show you in a little bit an example of our planning template, but where it's going to live, what it's going to look like. Is it going to be online? Is it going to be paper? How you're going to share that? And then during the planning period, so once the school year starts and you're in the nitty gritty planning, during that planning period, really determining, as Christina was saying, we'll go over it more a little bit later, but determining what co-teaching model you're going to be using. So that might be team teaching, parallel teaching, the teaching roles. So specifically what each teacher is going to be doing. We're constantly assessing student learning to make sure that the planning is accessible for all students. Preparing and prepping materials, so making sure that's even as well, that's not all on the gen ed teacher. Providing input on the lesson content and differentiation UDL strategies. Accepting suggestions, agreeing to disagree. So just really figuring out how you work well as a team. And then during the teaching, just making sure you have a lot of transparency and telling the students why there's two teachers and that it's really exciting and awesome. We have a lot of our students really love having two teachers. And then it's really crucial that you create an inclusive environment, within each classroom, as well as, we have a really inclusive environment and vision at our school, but really creating that within your classroom and taking time to teach into that and create that can really help throughout the year for co-teaching. As I was discussing before, ensuring that both teachers are viewed equally in the eyes of the students. Both teachers take a lead in the classroom. So it's not always one teacher, the gen ed teacher is teaching, special ed teacher, or the co-teacher comes in and is just assisting, that they are having equal ownership in the classroom and equal amount of teaching. Both teachers talk during instruction. Both teachers give directions and give permissions. So for example, if a student asks to go to the bathroom, both of them can do that. And both teachers work with all students. So I am not going in as a special education teacher and just working with the students with IEPs. I am working with all students as well as the gen ed teacher. And then after teaching, making sure that you're sharing grading. I will say at McMicken, a lot of times the specific grading does come down to the gen ed teacher because we have our own grading for IEPs and things like that. So a lot of times the report card does come down to the gen ed teacher filling that out. But as far as like reading through writing samples and all of that, you're grading those together. Reflecting what worked, what didn't work, about constantly evaluating groups, as I mentioned before, we do through that DAP, the data analysis protocol, that we're, evaluating if our small groups are still working, if they need to be moved about based off student growth, and how and when and how will the students, you teach the students who are below benchmark. So how we make sure that we're really, tailoring instruction for all students. And then how, as any teacher would, how would you challenge the students that are accelerated? So really just a lot of reflecting and sharing those responsibilities and having a lot of open conversations about each individual student and doing it all together. So really the overall gist of this chart here is that you're sharing responsibilities and you're doing it together and really finding that time where you can do all of those things. All right, so now I'm going to show you an example of the planning documents that we use. So we're going to stop sharing this screen and I'm going to share, we do this on OneNote. I like things to look pretty and organized. And so we do a lot of things at our school on Google Drive, but for co-teaching, we didn't find that to be as successful for our team. So we do ours on OneNote. So I'm going to go ahead and share my OneNote here. I am on my Mac and it's in dark mode. For me, it's a little harder to see. So I apologize if that's a little bit harder to view. So first here, this first template is our meeting agenda. So every time we meet, we talk about, so this was a year that we co-taught reading and writing. So this year, myself, I'm Sarah, I taught writing, co-taught writing with Whitney, the gen ed teacher, and then Dina is the other LRC teacher, and she co-taught reading with her. So the three of us would meet. And then when we were talking about writing, Dina would just be off to the side, working on her IEP documents or anything she needed to do for the other side of her job that was not co-teaching. So we would talk about what we need to do for reading that day, what we need to plan specifically, what things we needed to look at, and then any notes throughout the meeting we took over there. Same with writing. And then under here, each of our names is where we would put our to-do list at the end. So maybe it was my job to create the anchor charts for those days that we talked about. Maybe Whitney's job was to remember to collect all the writing samples or all of our the kids' writing notebooks at the end of the day. So for the next day, we could grade the writing. So just really writing down what we need to do each day. And then this is where our unit plans lived. So again, a lot of these documents were created during those release days with the whole team, because our co-teaching team is part of the PLC. So we're not necessarily doing our own thing as co-teachers. We are doing the same unit, plan and all of that as the whole grade level team. So this is where we just really talk about what sessions, what lessons we're doing that day. And then these documents here are just kind of like a deeper look at the unit planning. And then for each month, we would put the session number up here. And then, sorry, this is really small. Let me move in here. We'd put the session number for writing, what we were doing, the method. So this is the method of co-teaching we were doing for that day, because that can change day to day, weekly, monthly, and then same for reading as well. So we do that for each day. And then for reading and writing, we would have our weekly plans. So we would write in our curriculum. We have different curriculum starting next year, but our curriculum was broken down into these parts. So what would these look like for each week? Or sorry, each day. And then we had our groups. We make sure that we put our small groups with our other plans. So it all just lives in one document. So the groups, who's teaching that group, what's being taught in that group, here that's by last name, Ward and Harris, and what's being taught. Same with writing groups. Then we put IEP info in here, so the gen ed teachers know, because the gen ed teacher has to attend each of those IEPs. So making sure that they know how many are in the year and when are coming up. And then we just had a page for a writing notebook. If we needed to write like a writing sample as like the teacher's writing, we would just write it in here. We had A and B partnership groups or research project groups. Maybe they were a little bit different for research groups. So we just put all of our groupings in here. And then FMP is our data, our reading level data. So then we put fall, midpoint, winter, spring, we put all their scores in here. So this is just a way we made sure that all everything was in one place. So that is how we would kind of do the nitty gritty of co-planning. Jessica will pull up the PowerPoint.
Sarah, I love the OneNote. It's not something I've ever done, and it's almost like a master doc where everything's in one place. You have that unit plan, the month at a glance, and then you have your more like nitty-gritty lesson planning, and gets so perfect, especially to share with your related service providers.
It looks much more user friendly than Google Docs.
Yes. Okay, and some other things to consider is that students know the expectations for different learning areas in the classroom. So again, another thing that really focused on is that in most of our gen ed classrooms, they have like a kidney bean table where they do small groups. So we made sure that when we're co-teaching that there are 2 of those tables. So just really making sure that there's an area for everything for each teacher and that the students know the expectations for all those learning areas. So when we get into the different methods of co-teaching, but parallel teaching is when each teacher is teaching a half of the group. And so making sure that each student knows the expectations of those, because it can get louder because you have 2 teachers teaching at the same time. So just really making sure that just as you would with any gen ed class, that they know the expectations. Just going to look a little bit different when you're co-teaching. Some different expectations you might have to think of that you didn't think of before. Again, kind of going off that, students know where they're expected to go for lessons. So by having maybe a chart in the classroom or posting it on a doc paper or chart paper. Throughout the years, we've done it in different ways. We used to have like their names on each magnets, and we'd move them over if they were, being taught with Miss Morgan or Miss Ward, and they would know which side of the room to go to. Some years we've done it where, we have it on our OneNote actually, and then we can just share our screen on the doc camera. So just making sure you have an organized way so the students know where to go and it's efficient so you can begin teaching. Again, as you would normally do in a gen ed classroom anyway. This is really important. Sometimes I'm saying these things, you're like, oh, I think everyone knows that, but I have seen it where this has not been the case, but really making sure that your small groups have names that they do not define their academic level. So we do our small groups a lot of times by just color, because we've been, older grades, but if you have younger grades, doing it by animal, whatever it is. So again, just kind of general education classroom stuff, but just really making sure, especially because these classrooms have a lot of students with IEPs that we're not, posting anything with academic level. As we've mentioned before, shifting groups to support learning needs and fostering an inclusive and culture. So just really always coming back to the data and seeing what we can do to shift groups as needed, and just really overall being super transparent. So explain this is a classroom or place where everybody gets what they need, talk about equity versus equality, and define inclusion. And so we spent a lot of time in the beginning of the year just really setting up the classroom to be an inclusive environment. And that's been really helpful for us to set it up for the rest of the school year.
Sarah, I love that last part about being transparent. I find that learners, particularly young learners, like they almost just get it already. Like, yeah, let's all be together and learn together, and we need different stuff. And it's something that we've almost had to, as adults, unlearn later in life now. So like setting it up in the beginning, I think is just pretty great and really allows the kids to teach us something too, because of how easily they adapt to these ideas.
Mm-hmm. So just some takeaways here is really that you're sharing responsibility of all students. You're sharing all responsibilities in the classroom. Be aware of students' strengths and needs. Monitor and modify teaching to the needs of all students. So UDL, differentiation. Evaluate students' groupings across the curriculum to meet each student's needs. Employ equitable practices always. Implement groupings that are flexible and that have students with IEPs, as well as students that are just in the general education classroom. Again, you don't want people to walk in and know who the special education teacher is. And encourage student discourse. So this has been really huge for a lot of our students with IEPs. They didn't, before co-teaching, we saw a lot of our students would just kind of sit in the back. They'd, slide by because they were, following directions, but they weren't necessarily engaging in the discourse. And so co-teaching has been really helpful to encourage students to engage in that discourse, because as we've taught them, it's an inclusive environment. So just do your best, share what's on your mind, and engage in the discourse.
Okay, so we're going to move into co-teaching next. Before that, I want to take a 5-minute break for everyone to move around and go to the bathroom. Before we take that 5-minute break, does anyone have any questions related to the co-planning time or perhaps master schedule? Knowing that we're going to move into co-teaching in a minute, let's try and point those questions towards what we've already discussed.
I saw a question about how many minutes planning periods are. So throughout the day, our planning periods are 45 minutes. The students are in specialists for 45 minutes.
I like Colleen's question as you moved in this direction of inclusion and team teaching, how did you get reluctant staff on board?
That's a very great question. And so even this school year, we are, in the beginning, we set this up, it was a lot of, oh, these two teachers are co-teaching, these two teachers are co-teaching, they're doing that inclusive work. And it was like, wait a minute, we're all doing this inclusive work. So we've really just highlighted what teachers are already doing that's inclusive. So a lot of times teachers are like, don't want one more thing on their plate, right? So it's really building on their expertise and what they're already doing. And so I think that's a great place to start, is highlighting you're doing all these inclusive practices, especially as UDL is a big thing right now. I know across many, many districts is really highlighting you're doing all these things. UDL is inclusive. And so that's a way how we've got a lot of teachers on board. And I will just say at McMicken, we have a lot of students or a lot of teachers that have just come in that have that mindset. They're ready to do something different. But I know there are, teachers at different schools that are reluctant, but I think really building off their strengths and what they already have, what they're already doing can be really helpful.
I love that idea. I think we talk a lot about strength-based approaches with our students. So why not apply that to our coworkers and colleagues as well? And Christina and I talked a little bit yesterday about how I feel like when you experience resistance from someone else, or even like when I've been resistant in scenarios, it's often because I just don't feel supported or ready to do something. So it almost boils down to like provide the support and the encouragement and then see what comes. Because a lot of the time I'm resistant out of fear.
Yeah, I'll ditto that. I feel like as a society, a lot of our resistance to change is based out of fear, and that fear that we're not going to be supported, we're just going to be left there to like drown, and for good reason, because it has probably happened to us all at one point. I had a great discussion with my afternoon group yesterday, working with a fully inclusive school, and I know that there have been times where teachers have been left, for lack of a better word, with a student that maybe they're uncomfortable working with. And that is not due to like being malicious. Sometimes stuff happens, but it's that communication that needs to be there to ensure that from the beginning that each other will be supported, that situation won't happen. And if it does, because there's a grand, very appropriate reason for it happening, that the teacher will have the tools, or another person can come in and provide support for that 5 to 10 minutes. So I know in my experiences working with the many schools that I've worked with, it's a commitment between you and your co-teacher that we got each other's back, because I fear algebra. And I made that very clear with my co-teacher, and they provided me with the support that, don't worry, you can do this. I won't let you be left up there teaching ninth graders. Ooh, ninth graders, you guys. But we have that fear of like, we'll look foolish or silly because we're not fluent with it yet. So if you commit to that, I'll be there for you. The fear goes away. It doesn't go away immediately, but it will. Any other questions? I know I personally think I missed some as they came in through the chat.
I saw Mike had a couple of questions about planning. How many minutes per week of planning time? So really, again, that kind of is up to you and your co-teacher. So I'm one of those people that really likes to have my planning time with my co-teacher after school or before school, so I can really focus on the kids during the day. Because again, I have behavior and things that pop up. So my 45 minutes that's devoted to planning might not actually be 45 minutes. That I can really sit there and do some good planning. And so kind of just depends what you and your co-teacher kind kind of decide. And then he asked, is there scheduled morning planning time prior to school starting? At our school, we have 30 minutes of time that we are paid for that we can plan, do whatever, get the day started. And we also have those 30 minutes at the end of the school day as well.
I had a similar experience as Sarah, where as a high school, we had a very solid master schedule that involved prep time daily. So I worked with my co-teachers in asking, do you want to co-plan during prep, or do you want to co-plan before or after school? So it was just totally dependent on, what worked best for the individual. Majority of my teachers wanted to co-plan during prep, and then I had a lot that wanted to co-plan before or after school. And I'm with Sarah. I preferred before or after school planning, just in case something came up and I had to be pulled to be with a kid. It was nice to have that like dedicated time where kids aren't even on campus yet.
And then I saw another question asking if other schools in my district, I work in the Highland School District, are following kind of our lead. Yes, and as well as other schools across kind of Washington State, as Jessica was talking about, we're part of a demo site. So yes, we share this information with schools in our district and across other districts. Our district is leaning toward a very inclusive vision for the whole district, which means dismantling all self-contained classrooms and making all classrooms inclusive through co-teaching and other inclusive practices. That's a big overarching goal. But yes, so it is being carried through our district a lot.
I see this comment that says, you are all very lucky. And you're right. Yes, I think that it's very important to note that a master schedule, co-planning time, and co-teaching doesn't rest solely on the shoulders of the teachers and the educators. It goes higher up than that. It goes to the administrators and even above. So this is a system-wide thing that involves a lot of people to make it happen. And I think that's notable.
There's a couple questions related to kiddos with IEPs. So Debbie's asking, did it for you, Sarah, ever end up where you had the majority of your kiddos in small groups be the ones with IEPs?
Yeah, sorry, I was just responding to that, and I accidentally sent it in a direct message to Barb. So sorry, Barb. So in co-teaching, we ensure that it is never just students with IEPs when we're in the gen ed classroom. Again, our goal is to have somebody come observe us, walk in and not know who the special education teacher is. So we just ensure that all of our groupings, include students with IEPs and not. For our intervention blocks, when students are pulled and we again ensure they're not missing core instruction, a lot of our groups are students with IEPs, as a lot of our students are just working on decoding and skills that our other students in that grade level don't need, because most of the kids that do need those services do have an IEP. But we make sure they're happening in the gen ed classroom, that they are groups with students with and without IEPs.
And then there's a comment about this being impossible for children with significant behavior disorders. And I will say it is very difficult for sure, but it is 100% possible. I helped open a fully inclusive school in Los Angeles, California. We did not have a special day class. We did not even have a room, a lot like for sensory space or to write out a behavior. It can be done. It can take some time and some practice, but if you have the team that's willing to make it work and you have the strategies that are in place, the behavior systems that are in place, the environmental strategies that are in place, all of those things have to be in place with the team that's willing to make it work, and it will work. I can't speak highly enough of the school. You can look it up if you like, Wish Academy in Los Angeles. They are amazing, and it's a charter school, so families can apply to go there. We have numerous individuals with significant needs and behaviors, and it works. And eventually the behaviors dissipate because these students are with individuals that aren't expressing significant challenges. If you think about putting your most high need students all together in one classroom, are the behaviors going to change or worsen? They oftentimes worsen because they don't have those peer models to look to. So it is possible, be positive, you can do it, but change could be slow.
Absolutely. And we have had students come to McMicken that typically would have gone into those self-contained programs. Like I was saying, we don't have those more intensive self-contained classrooms at my school, but we have students that typically would have gone there and their parents push for them to be an inclusive environment. So we have students that have more severe needs that are in our general education classrooms as well, even with grade levels that aren't co-teaching, and they are doing wonderful. And as Christina was saying, a lot of those behaviors that you see in a self-contained classroom just aren't there when they're in gen ed with their typically developing peers.
Any other questions before we take like a 5-minute break? And Kathy, I love, before we go, I love your comment, and you're right. It's encompassing hard work. That's lucky to be in a district and a world and a social setting where we're focusing on these things. That's maybe the luck part, but the luck doesn't play out in making it happen. Making it happen takes advocation, work, and time. So
it's also in Washington State in particular, particularly upstream work. So Highline is moving upstream. We're moving upstream. We are not moving with the current. And so the current is still against us in a lot of respects. So we didn't land in a lucky spot, and as far down in the inclusion percentages as we are in our state. So I know how hard Highline is working to go upstream. And so just want to point that out because we're swimming with them.
yes. But Kathy, anyone who I've talked to who works with you has said they feel very lucky to be working with someone like you. So I think that's where I would put the word luck.
Fair enough. It's good to hear in June.
I bet. Okay, I think this is a good time to take a break. If you don't need to use the restroom, I encourage you to stand up and stretch, move around to your apartment or wherever you happen to be, pet your dog. How about we meet back here at, let's start back at 11. I think that should give us, Christina, you think maybe 5 minutes instead?
5 minutes.
Okay, 10:57 now. We'll get going.
Hey, Jessica, I see you talking, but you're muted.
I didn't say anything too profound. So, all right, I'm here. We talked about the master schedule that creates and protects co-planning time, and we talked about what that co-planning time entails. So now let's talk about what that might look like in the classroom. I'm sure that at this point, what are we, an hour and a half in? A lot of you know what co-teaching is. It's when 2 or more certified professionals work together to teach a shared classroom of students. The teams often consist of 1 gen ed teacher and 1 special education teacher or education specialist. But these teaching teams can be made up of 2 gen ed teachers as long as an education specialist is part of the planning team. Paraeducators can also be utilized in specific co-teaching models. You need flexibility to be able to deliver supports to students in meaningful ways, just like you need flexibility to instruct and teach in meaningful ways. And I think co-teaching really allows for that flexibility. There are 6 models of co-teaching. So right now, I hope this is when you're thinking, okay, there's that flexibility she was just talking about. Each model is specifically designed to target identified needs within the classroom. The teaching team chooses the model that seems to fit their needs, and they integrate it into the lesson plan. More than 1 model can be used within a class period. One teach, one observe is used when specific information is needed regarding student data. In this, teachers switch off delivering instruction and gathering data. Something to note is that this model should not be used to catch up on grading, checking emails, calling families, taking a break, etc. This model is already the most ineffective or inefficient of the 6 models, but it is certainly beneficial for data collection needs. The second is station teaching, which is really familiar concept probably to most here. In this model, content and students are divided into at least 2 groups. Each educator teaches the content they are responsible for, and then the groups switch. This is a great model for utilizing paraeducator supports. They can support at a specific station or provide supervision of independent workstations. And groups can switch between stations within a class period or over the course of a module, so flexibility. The third co-teaching model is called parallel teaching. In parallel teaching, students are again divided into groups. Each teacher leads 1 group of students, and the instruction occurring in each group is the same or similar. This provides opportunities for differentiated instruction by providing manipulatives, specific accommodations, or stretch activities. It's really important to note that no group is seen as the lower achieving group, like Sarah was talking about earlier, in things like the naming, intentional naming of your groups. Are ways to approach this that allows the 2 educators to deliver content in a way that meets student needs in a collective setting. One way to address that is by ensuring that the special education specialist isn't always assigned to 1 specific group or students, particularly a group that might have higher support needs. We want to kind of be switching off, like Sarah was mentioning earlier. The 4th co-teaching model is called alternate teaching. In this model, it also utilizes small groups in which 1 teacher leads a lesson or activity while the other teacher works with a small group. This model is particularly helpful in providing opportunities for remediation, pre-teaching assessments, and a way to catch up students who have been absent. The 5th is team teaching. This is the most fluid co-teaching models. Both teachers instruct and support 1 whole group of students alongside each other. This is the most complex co-teaching approach, but it's really satisfying and an effective way to teach. It depends not only on effective co-planning, but kind of a marriage of teaching styles. It really allows the students to benefit from the knowledge and the skills of each instructor. But beyond that, it allows the educators to benefit and learn from one another. The last model is 1 teach, 1 support. In this one teacher actively teaches while the other teacher moves around the classroom, providing unobtrusive assistance to students as needed. This definitely doesn't take advantage of all of the learning benefits that occur when two teachers actively engage together, but there are scenarios where it could be beneficial.
Thanks, Jessica. So from what we've learned from the 6 co-teaching models is they're all different and they all serve different purposes. So in your co-planning, it's going to be really important when you're outlining the type of unit or standard or objective that you're doing for the day, that you find the correct, I say correct, or the co-teaching model that best supports what you're trying to achieve. So like the first model, not the best teaching scenario, but man, is it great for data collection to have someone be able to be teaching, not losing instructional minutes, and the other individual getting some much needed data to inform the lesson for the following day or week. It's like super beneficial. We love team teaching for the purposes that Jessica just mentioned. It's a true marriage of styles. It keeps your students engaged. They get to have the different perspectives of each teacher. Some teachers will explain things differently, not to mention the cadence of speech. It'll help people stay engaged. And not to mention, when you're really doing it effectively, it's fun. I didn't get there with all of my co-teachers. Team teaching continued to be a struggle with some of them, but that's because our relationship didn't get built as fast as my relationship was built with other teachers. I'm sure we would have gotten there. I just didn't get there as fast as with other individuals. So I'm going to go into why is co-teaching important. It's important for a few reasons. And number one, the most important reason is that co-teaching is going to benefit all students. Co-teaching models are interchangeable to meet the needs of learners within a learning objective. So not only is co-teaching and choosing your model important to support the lesson, but it's also important in which you choose to support your students. If you have a group, a class that maybe does have a significant number of IEPs in the classroom, station teaching is going to be really effective. And splitting into 2 groups is going to be really effective. It's effective in that it provides a dedicated individual to be able to answer some of the questions that might come up more frequently, or that might not come up at all because there's that fear of answering questions. But you can see easier working with a smaller group of students and anticipate those needs. So co-teaching provides opportunities for targeted intervention with individuals who have been identified at risk. This is why I love UDL. There is no reason why we need an IEP to help a student who's struggling. Why do we have to wait until they're failing and prove that they're below average to get an IEP? We shouldn't. We should be addressing those students' needs and catching them where they are and giving them that support before it gets too late. And you can do this really effectively with co-teaching, because again, there's more than one adult in the room. Co-taught classes ensure that students with individualized education plans are able to receive instruction in core content areas from content area experts. Like I said, there's some great rationale for individuals working one-on-one with their special education teacher. But in terms of meeting grade level standards, if I was a parent, which I am not, I would want my child to be working with the grade level content area expert, right? Why are we having special education teachers who are not trained in grade level content, especially high school grade level content, working with a group of special education students with IEPs, when they could be receiving this instruction with an individual who knows what they're talking about truly? So in addition to the general educator's core content knowledge, students have support of an education specialist who supports by providing ways to use the strengths to address areas of growth. Co-teaching also provides opportunities for stretch learning. This stretch learning should always be available for every student and not just for students labeled gifted. Remember how important that is. We aim to set meaningful goals for all of our students. And, there's those two groups of students that often get left behind. Your students that are not meeting standard and your students who are above standard. So what are we doing to continue to help those students get up to meeting standards and help those students keep pushing? Right. So what are the possible outcomes to utilizing a co-teaching model? If co-teaching models are appropriately utilized, there are many positive outcomes that come from co-teaching. For example, through collaboration, teachers are able to support each other in planning, teaching, and assessment. This leads to equal partnership. In addition, learning is occurring in the general education setting or least restrictive environment. With instruction from both general educators and education specialists, mastery of learning objects are achieved more frequently, and the general education and education specialists have the opportunity to share their expertise and continue with their educational growth. So a common theme of my presentation yesterday and today is that not one person can be solely responsible for meeting the needs of all these students. It's going to take the different personalities and expertise to make for one cohesive lesson for all. Important things to remember. So it's important to remember that co-teaching does require a lot of work, especially up front to find and establish a routine. Once you've put in that work and you really understand your co-teacher, the routine becomes much easier, the planning becomes much easier and much faster. So it's one of those practices that if you commit to putting in the work up front, you're going to have a lot of success in the future. To make the process easier, like we mentioned before, you want to establish a common planning time and that planning time be sacred. You want to have enough time in your common planning time per content area. Okay, so for education specialists, you might be co-teaching with different individuals, which means you would need different co-planning times. And like Sarah shared earlier, it's dependent on either your administration as to when you have been provided co-planning time, or if you want to work outside those boundaries to do before or after school, whichever works for you. Before or after school, of course, might be outside of your contracted hours. So it's important that that planning time does occur inside your school day, but if you choose to do it outside of your contracted hours, that's your prerogative. So in addition, shared agreements should be established to ensure that both parties develop mutual respect for each other. General education teachers should be willing and able to share their content, knowledge, expertise, and education specialist teachers should be willing and able to share their expertise related to behavior management strategies, accommodations, and modifications. Shared agreements was probably the most helpful thing that we did when building our co-teaching relationships. We had just a series of questions that we asked each other, what are your pet peeves? What are things that you really don't like doing? Like, please don't ask me to do this at like this time of day. We just sort of got to know each other in a way that was very true. We're speaking our truth. And, that's important because we don't want to enter into a relationship with like a chip on our shoulder or trust not being there. So speak your truths and let your co-teacher know your strengths, your areas that you're struggling through and goals that you have short-term and long-term. So again, we're going to pass it off to Sarah to discuss McMicken's journey related to co-teaching and her personal journey as well. So Sarah, you take it away.
All right. So as I referenced earlier, this is just kind of the journey that McMicken has had. Like I said, we have done this over years. So this did not just happen overnight. It's been a lot of intentional work over a number of years. So our first year in 2015, 2016, this was a year that I was talking that myself and who ended up being my co-teacher the next year, Naomi Fair, who actually works with UW as well. She and I attended district provided professional development to learn more about inclusive practices. So a lot of that was co-teaching and how you kind of co-teaching one-on-one and how you get started. So then we went back to our administration, said this is something we want to try. They were totally on board. And so then that is kind of when everything started. So then in 2016, 2017, we call that laying the groundwork. So that is when I co-taught with Naomi, and we co-taught in a 3rd, 4th grade split classroom for literacy. So for reading and writing. We learned something very important that year, that when you are co-teaching in a split classroom, the students that have IEPs should be in 4th grade. So when you have students in a split classroom, you don't want students with IEPs that are in that younger grade, because really that's having them access higher grade level content. And so we learned a lot that year, as was our first year of co-teaching. And that was just one of the things that we learned if we were to co-teach in a split again. In 2017, 2018, we had a lot more co-teaching classrooms. Our first year of co-teaching was a huge success. And so our admin really kind of wanted to scale up this model. And so they worked with our other special education staff, as well as some other staff that are like out of classroom staff, to have some more co-teaching classrooms. So that year, I co-taught in 5th grade for literacy. Our EBC, our behavior self-contained classroom teacher, co-taught in 4th grade math. The Naomi, the one who co-taught with me the year prior, she then became a co-teaching partner. So then she co-taught with a gen ed teacher in 6th grade literacy. And then our instructional reading coach co-taught in 2nd grade, or sorry, she was our instructional math coach. She co-taught in 2nd grade with a gen ed teacher. So really that year we had a lot of co-teaching partnerships. And then the next school year in 2018, 2019, we learned a lot from that year prior, and learned that less is not, or more is not always better, that we really wanted to make sure that they were really highly successful co-teaching partnerships. And so that next school year, I co-taught in 4th grade literacy. Our behavior teacher co-taught in 5th grade math. Our admin intern co-taught in 6th grade literacy, and our literacy coach co-taught in 2nd grade reading. So as you can see, our admin believes a lot in using our outside staff, out of classroom staff, to co-teach at least one period. In 2019, 2020, I co-taught in 3rd grade literacy. Our behavior teacher co-taught in 5th grade math and 5th grade reading. This is the year that he really decided that he was going to co-teach his whole day. And this was the year that our students that were in the self-contained classrooms were really not, those self-contained classrooms are no longer self-contained. The students were fully in gen ed all day. And we've never really looked back since then. So it's been fully inclusive since the school year 2019, 2020. And then our primary EBC teacher, she then was on board, and she co-taught in 3rd grade. And then we started some different type of inclusive practices at McMicken. So we have an integrated kindergarten, which is about half students are in general education, and the other half are students with IEPs. And so we kept a lot of those students that were in the integrated kindergarten, who tend to have more severe needs. They stayed on our LRC caseload for 1st grade. So it was a lot of just inclusive practices we implemented so that they would be successful in their 1st grade gen ed classroom. So typically those students would have gone to a self-contained classroom in a different school, but instead we kept them at McMicken and used inclusive practices so that they could be in their gen ed classroom all day. And then in this last school year, the COVID year was a little interesting, but we taught in 4th grade, co-taught in 4th grade math and reading. Due to hybrid that started in March, we co-taught until March. But then after that, it got too complicated because we had to teach remote and hybrid, and it was just too complicated. But our primary and intermediate EBC teachers continued to co-teach all year. Their students were completely integrated into general education. Their classrooms are no longer self-contained for the whole year. And then we also had students that stayed again from the IK classroom that we transitioned to LRC caseload for inclusion. And then for next school year, 2021, 2022, LRC is most likely, we might continue to co-teach, but we are really focusing our efforts on different inclusive practices. So we are going to now be at every gen ed teachers or every grade level planning every day between myself and the other LRC teacher to support inclusion, because our students, even if they're still receiving services from a pullout group during those intervention blocks, they spend majority of their day in their classrooms. So we really want to help gen ed teachers feel confident in providing strong instruction. And again, building off their strengths that they're doing a lot of this already, but really teaching them UDL and differentiation so they can support the students in the classroom. So we'll be doing a lot of coaching. And then our EBC, our primary and intermediate behavior teachers will continue to co-teach. The students will be fully included in the classroom. The classrooms will no longer be self-contained. And so that means that we really restructured EBC to look more like LRC, so flexible caseloads. LRC will continue to co-teach. We're still determining that because numbers, we just don't have the numbers now as we normally do, because some families are still choosing remote in our district. And then we actually took all of the LRC caseload and both of the caseloads from our EBC classrooms and combined them all and just said, what is best for each student? And even though they were assigned LRC, did not mean that I'm necessarily case managing them. If they are being co-taught in a classroom with our EBC teacher, then they're case managing them. So we really are providing services very flexibly and having case managers be very flexible as well. And then LRC will continue to support inclusive practices. We have some more students that would typically have gone to self-contained classrooms across the district that will be joining us next school year. And we will just be providing a lot of inclusive practices so they are successful in their gen ed classroom. So that's kind of the journey that McMicken has had. Like I said, it's taken a lot of years to get here. We're excited for next school year to again kind of try something different. We've been doing co-teaching for a while. We will always continue co-teaching as it's a great inclusive practice, but it's not the only one. So we are going to be trying some different inclusive practices as well.
Thank you, Sarah. Jessica, can you go back one slide? Well, I'll just verbally sum up the takeaways that we want to make sure you guys have grasped from today. So we hope that this spotlight topic on, master scheduling, co-planning, and co-teaching supported your growth and development. We hope that you now have a better understanding of the 6 models of co-teaching, how to use them, when to use them, that co-teaching provides equitable educational and social opportunities for all students, and that collaboration is essential to student success, and that outcomes and learning objectives will have higher rates of generalization and mastery when using these co-teaching strategies. So that sums it up for our formal presentation. Based on yesterday at my presentation, we had a lot of questions, so we wanted to be sure to give as much time to that as possible. So I would say we have a chunk of time left. So rather than writing your question in the chat, it would be great if you could unmute and we can, we can all see each other and have a conversation about, what's working, what's not. I'll also just talk real quick. If you haven't tried to access the Google Drive yet, we have what we call tip sheet. So it's like a 1 or 2 pager that sort of highlights the top 5 or so things about master scheduling, co-planning, and co-teaching. And if we have more resources in that drive, including our slides, But if you want more information or you want to hear other schools talk about their experiences with master scheduling, co-teaching, co-planning, please visit our website, the IPP Demonstration Sites Project. We have a plethora of webinars that you can view, all talking about schools like initial journeys and their goals leading up to what we call deep dive webinars, where they're talking about the inclusive practices that they're really proud of. Kathy Davis from Ruby Bridges just shared on there talking about inclusive mission and vision and planning for a brand new school that opened virtually, which was awesome. For all you preschool teams out there, we have about 6, I think, demonstration sites that are preschool, and they talk about UDL and their whole process. So check out that website for further videos that you can watch at your leisure. The webinars are like 60 to 90 minutes.
Videos, and there's a portal somewhere on there that allows you to connect with schools and actually set up real life, real Zoom meetings with these schools at the moment. Hopefully later it can be in person. But let's say a school is working on an inclusionary practice, you want to get going and you have some questions, or you just want to see it happening, we can help you make that happen. So check out the website. But for now, would love to use the rest of our time to kind of chat, ask any questions, any thoughts you have.
And I'll just say really quick, if you don't want to spend the rest of your time with us,
Absolutely.
I'm going to drop a link to the evaluation survey, and we'd love your feedback on that. So again, you are free to depart, but we're going to hold the space for any other questions. And here is the survey link.
So one of the things I was wondering about is every year I always have a couple of kids who have super high absenteeism. And how do you keep them up and going and with the group, even though I'm going to just say one of my little boys missed 40 days this year. And sometimes it was in 2-week blocks. So twice he was gone for 10 days.
That's definitely a struggle, and I can only imagine how difficult that was for any of all of our families during COVID times. During the regular school year, if that were to happen, I would keep frequent communication with the parents, you know, calling and checking in, because generally that check-in can serve as a, oh, they do care, and maybe I, you know, if it's related to effort, maybe I could put in a little bit more effort in trying to get my kiddo to school on time. But then working as a team to determine maybe the function of why he's not coming. Is it illness? If it's illness, maybe a service could be provided related to home hospital where the educator is coming to the house. I'm from California, so I don't know if that's something that Washington does. If it's related to transportation and your district can offer transportation, that is generally helpful. I know for my family, we have a brother, my brother is in a wheelchair, and we would not be able to get him to school if we didn't have transportation. And at times he received home hospital services when he was undergoing major surgeries. So I would say the general education teacher, the education specialist, anyone on this child's team should be providing some sort of check-in regularly to assist in either getting the child back to school, or if the family's open to like sending work home, anything to keep them from falling behind.
Yeah, Christine, I think that's a great answer. And Colleen, I think that's a great question. Because when we're missing 10 days at a time, it's hard to even start thinking about learning and being caught up. We're not really in a place to learn. Who knows what's going on, and maybe want to start with why are we missing 10 days at a time?
Well, mom works nights, and so literally it's easier not to send him in her mind.
Yes. So it's figuring out how to meet the need of that family and of that kid. And I don't know where you are or what your district's going to be able to offer you, but finding some way to advocate for that need first. But yeah, first and foremost is probably, there's no way to stay caught up when you're missing 10 days at a time. There's really no way to learn.
I think though, going, if that student is in a co-teaching classroom, which Colleen, we've had a very, similar situation. We have a lot of students with absences, and their learning was impacted before the absences, and then obviously their learning is impacted because of the absences. There is a lot of beauty in having two teachers in a classroom. So if they're in a co-taught classroom, that might be a day where you're flexible. Oh, they showed up. Let's do one teach, one assist, or one teach, one observe. So you can really see, like, are they keeping up? What do we need to do to support him? Get some data on that student so that you can place them in the right kind of small groups since they've been gone for a chunk of days. So that's one way to respond to that, because I've been in your situation many times before. No matter what you do, sometimes absences don't change, and it just has to go to the point of truancy, and that's beyond you. But so I think, in a co-teaching classroom, there are ways where you can support that for the days they are at school.
Thank you.
I had a question about where your small groups were being held and whether they were in the general education setting. And I don't know if that got answered. My internet glitched at the moment when I asked it, so.
At McMicken, are you referring to the small groups for co-teaching and or the intervention blocks?
Both.
So for the intervention blocks, it depends on the grouping. So we have groups that are happening in each general education classroom. We have groups that are happening we have pods for each kind of like grade level, 2 grade levels. And a lot of times our paraeducators are pulling groups into the pods. And then we have students that are in our resource room as well, if they need more of that like intensive decoding work. But like I said, our groups are very fluid and flexible, that it's not always students with IEPs that are with us, just another place to pull groups since, so for noise and things like that. And then for co-teaching, our groups are always in the general education classroom that we're co-teaching in.
So your students with sensory issues don't have trouble with being in the groups, in the small groups in your general ed classroom?
Nope, we just respond to sensory needs as needed. And, it's a lot of things in their IEPs. We just provide those things in the classroom the best we can. Sometimes some of our students need breaks out of the classroom throughout the day, but it wouldn't be during those intervention block times. It would be during other times. Our next school year, our school is also doing a 30-minute chunk at the end of the school day where students can have, we can help them with sensory needs. We can support with check-in, check-out things. So a lot of times our students were pulled for those types of things at the end of the day. So our whole school will be doing kind of inclusive reward reinforcement type systems there too, to support all students, since we are having more and more students, in the gen ed classroom all day. So again, just kind of finding flexible ways that works within your schedule to make it more inclusive.
Okay, thank you.
I think to add on to that question, a lot of times in education, I feel like we might adopt the mentality of our kids with more significant behaviors or challenges need to earn their way into the inclusive setting because we're fearful for the behaviors that are happening, and we don't want them to happen in that setting or to another student, right? To be realistic. And I think what's really important to remember is I personally don't hold the belief that that child will ever show enough improvement in a segregated setting to earn their way into the inclusive setting. It is much better to just put them into that general education classroom because they are general education students first. Know that you need to have your systems and practices in place. Know that it's, as Kathy said earlier, it's hard work, not luck. Improvement will be made. For some students, it'll be made faster. For some students, it'll be take a while. To give you an example, my high school that I assisted in opening was part of a larger K through 8th grade program. A lot of our students had started in inclusive setting from kindergarten. So they had absolutely no issues, as they went through the years, because that was what they were used to. That's all they knew. They weren't having major behaviors to get out of doing work because they knew that this is where they're supposed to be. Like I could go into other little anecdotal stories, but I won't today. But when we opened our high school, we had a lot of new students who had been in segregated settings their whole educational careers. It was a very challenging year. Freshman year for a lot of our students was very challenging. Students with mild to moderate disabilities were confused as to why they weren't being pulled. There was a lot of adaptation involved in working through the challenges. But I can very happily say that by sophomore year, for the majority of the kids, the behaviors that were occurring were no longer occurring. And by senior year, I saw literally no behavior in a couple of students. It was awesome, but it's work.
You know, you just made me think about an article I read talking about students in inclusive classrooms, all the students in there, students with IEPs, students without. They have improvements academically, yes, but these emotional behavioral improvements as well. Like almost everyone in the classroom reported like a decreased fear of differences at the end of the year. And that to me feels huge into 2021, because I think a lot of things are happening out of fear of differences, difference of other, not like me, different than what I've known before, different than what I've done before. So just knowing that being all together with people who are different than me in a year's time is going to decrease my fear of something different, you know, it feels huge. And that's happening for students with or without IEPs. So academics growth is happening for everyone, but so is like perspective taking. And I feel like that taps into empathy in a lot of ways. So Kathy, I see you nodding with your thumbs up. Thank you. Yeah, I just, that's a part I love about it.
I think also too, a lot of our families have shared growth, more growth outside of school at home. Due to the inclusive practices in the classroom. I think a lot of times the self-contained classrooms and kind of the things we've set up for kids over the years at school is not really setting them up for success, because we're building this certain classroom where they're going to have all these supports. But when you go to the grocery store, you go anywhere, these supports aren't always set up. And so really you're not going to have a student go in a classroom and they're going to have everything they need the moment they step in there. There's going to be trial and error. There's going to be periods where it might be tough, but really in the long run, we are doing them such a service by providing them with not such a, tailored environment. Like we can give them, things they need to be successful, but really it's preparing them for life outside of school as well.
Yeah. If the purpose of schooling is to help learners go into our community and thrive, well, we live in a collective community. We all interact with one another, hopefully, we rely on other people and we rely on the help of other people. You don't go through a day without assistance from someone or interacting with someone. And so if we're sending people into a collective community, shouldn't our learning environments be a collective community as well?
Yes. And I saw Kathy's comment in the chat, providing UDL and all these things for all students is so important. We have classrooms where all students can go. Special education is not a place. So it's not like, oh, here's where the LRC students or the EBC students can go calm down. This is a sensory room and a really good place for all students to calm down. If any student needs to come there, they can come do that. So really just setting up that super inclusive environment so that it's not, singling out certain students is really essential in these kind of models.
Great question in the chat. How is a student supposed to learn how typically developing peers behave if they're not with them? Jenny, I think
I'm sorry, that's a comment. I didn't know the question mark.
I was going to say it felt like a comment.
Yeah.
We support your comment. And again, we're going to hold the space until noon. You do not have to stay, but if you want to engage in some conversation or have more questions, we're here for you.
So my biggest thing is how to get the district, the main district office on board with this. Um, that's one of my main things is how to even get it started. Because I really like the idea that you have all this planning time because you need the planning time that's incorporated within your minutes and you don't take minutes away from your instructional time. And that it's protected planning time because a lot of times we have, 2 days a week is prep time and 1 day staff time and, whatever, however it's set up. But there's a lot of times where things get, like you said, oh, we have to do this training or that training. So my biggest thing is just how to even get the district on board with it. And then I'll worry about how parents get on board with and all that stuff. But the first step is really just getting your district office to put the time, energy, and money if it's needed, because you were saying that your parents have 5 to 6 hour days, which that doesn't happen with my district because we would have to pay them benefits, anything over 19 hours. So I guess that's my big thing is just how to get the district to buy into all of this.
That's a great question. And I do not have the answer there. 'Cause
I
I think
really good way to do that is so we've had this with other administrators in our district and things like that, and people are just always kind of sending them links to articles or links to the demo site project videos and webinars. And I think that's a really good kind of just like giving them the information, because I think it's challenging when you don't work for in the district office. Like it does have to start there. But I will say, like, we started at McMicken without even really talking much to the district. And then it became kind of a district thing. So kind of starting too small in your school, if you can get your admin on board and really starting there, I think can be really successful. As far as the parents thing, I say this time and time again, it's all based on trust. If you build a good relationship with the parents, they're going to trust that you are going to provide their child with what is best. We also have parents that have attended these webinars through the demo sites and learned inclusive practices where they were closed off to these ideas too. And then they went to these webinars. They're like, oh my gosh, yes, these are awesome. So I really think it's, sharing resources and just building on, building trust with those families so that you can, really share your excitement about inclusive practices and that they feel like they can trust that their student is going to get what they need in the Gen Ed classroom all day.
Yeah, to ditto that, trust, sharing resources, data collection, and remembering that change is based on fear the majority of the time. And it's relationship building, right? You can start just between, like, my very first teaching job was a self-contained class. My school didn't even know that there was a self-contained class on the campus, like the majority of teachers. So I'm walking around and they're like, oh, who are you? I'm like, oh, I'm the special education teacher. And they're like, we have one of those. And it just sort of becomes like, whoa, people only know what they know. So you can start small by introducing yourself if you're an education specialist to general education teachers, trying to work to get specific students included. Maybe they're like the quote unquote easier students where you don't necessarily have to worry about behaviors being an issue right out the gate. And then that can expand. By the next year, I was working with the counselor to work my students into the master schedule. And by that, I mean, letting them go to PE, letting them go to art. So that was my first little move. We started a coffee cart, which I have mixed feelings about because it's very special education-y, but what it served for me was introducing my students to the larger school community. They went door to door and teachers bought their morning coffee from my class. And then I had teachers saying, your students are so cool. They can be in my class. So I went from like begging to get kids in classes to teachers asking me to have them in their class. And then that does get some notice from the district eventually because they loved it. They wrote an article about it. Other teachers started doing it. So you don't have to think of how to get my district on board yet. Just think of the little things you can do to start building the practice. Like Sarah talked about, they started this in 2015. Little by little, they're working their way up. The district is taking notice. They're part of this project. So other schools are taking notice. You know, big changes can occur at your school site when you do get administration that like has your back, but that doesn't necessarily, you know, it's not the end all be all, right? You can still make individual change that can lead to larger growth. It unfortunately, our system of education is just a slower process based on fear, right? We fear what we don't know. So my recommendation is to just do what you think you can and set goals for yourself and goals, you know, long-term, short-term, and people will start taking notice.
I'm gonna say this at the risk of sounding probably a little too simple after Christina's wonderful response to that. But I have found the phrase, I need some help, to be very powerful. People typically respond with like, I would love to help you. So whether if that is to some administrators or a district leader or even the teacher in the classroom next to you, like, hey, I need some help with this idea I have, or I need this help with this thing that I just learned about at the Summer Institute. I think it looks really neat. I think it would be really neat at our school, but I need some help figuring out how to get it done. You know, I just find that simple term to help a lot. Hey, Jenny.
Oh, so what I did is I took the term push in literally. And I started to learn what the classrooms were like. And I was in a school where the special ed was a room. And so I wanted to get away from that. And so during writing block in some of the classrooms where I had students, I would just come in and I was visiting. And then I started moving around the classroom. And so I started little by little. It's like one class, and then it became 3 classes. And so it's a process. And the district I just left was talking about full inclusion. It's like, you can't go 0 to 60 in 1 year. And it worries me that you try to do too much too quickly and you get the pushback, where if you slowly do it, like you guys were talking about, step by step, then you get more buy-in.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. The buy-in piece is super important, right? Yeah, we cannot just go 0 to 60 and expect it to work. There are instances where I do feel like sometimes we do just need to like throw it to the wind, or whatever that phrase is. If I think about, you know, like scaffolding the inclusive process, which population of students is always going to be at the end of that process? It's our students with significant disabilities. So sometimes in that situation, you really do need to have somebody that's like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. It's not going to go super well. We're doing it, right? Because I love the incremental approach, because the incremental approach is going to be long lasting. I do worry about our kids with more significant behavioral challenges that get left because they're our last piece of the puzzle and we're never ready, right? We'll never be ready. So I think I totally ditto everything that Jenny says, and then keep in mind those kiddos that might still keep getting left out as the journey continues. Wait time is so hard on Zoom.
No. Well, we've had awesome engagement. I've loved everything everyone's kind of brought to the table, whether it was a question or just even that awesome example Jenny had for us a second ago. Does anything have anything else before we wrap up?
Hi there. I just had to, sorry, I had to get my kids off with the babysitter. It's been crazy this morning. So I just had one question, and maybe you covered this while I was outside. I was just wondering if maybe Sarah could go through like a case at the beginning that you thought for sure wasn't going to make it. And then like the way the kiddo just kind of transformed. I know it's a little harder, but like a quick version of that. I know everybody's ready to go, but that's what I was wondering. Because I think that's the worry, is that jumping to this model can sometimes feel so big and so worrisome with some of these tougher cases. So that's what I'd like to encourage people with at the end.
I think before Sarah answers that question, I think, we don't have to go all in, right? Like we just talked about. Your school coming together to decide what the goal of this year is, it would be more beneficial than, my brain's failing me. But yeah, Sarah, take it away.
So yeah, I have one particular student in mind. So he came to us in kindergarten. He was a student that was in special education preschool. He would have gone to one of our due to his diagnosis, he has Down syndrome. He would have typically have gone to ILC, which is our intensive learning center, our most intensive self-contained classroom. Typically in the past with that diagnosis, he would have just been placed there, which is not inclusive at all because he can totally access gen ed content. And so he came to McMicken instead. His mom pushed very hard for inclusive education. He was not within our boundaries of our school, but our special education director had him, address the things so he could come to McMicken. He came to McMicken and needed a lot of supports. He's loves to communicate, but you are not able to understand what he's saying. And so he needed a lot of SLP support. He needed a lot of visuals. He needed visuals for each lesson, but could totally access it. But it was a lot of work up front. There were behaviors too. And other parents that were concerned about, their child being hit or whatever it may be. And now I am happy to say that when he came back for hybrid this school year, he, we set up a lot of the same supports and visuals that he needed in kindergarten, and he didn't need a lot of them. And so now he'll be starting second grade with pretty much just his iPad to communicate and an arrival dismissal plan. So somebody bringing him, our paraeducator bringing him to and from the bus, which I think we'll be able to wean off of. The only reason we have that is he used to run in preschool, but he really won't need that support. So really, he doesn't even need a visual schedule anymore. So really the only support he's going to need and will continue to need in his educational career is his iPad that he's very self-sufficient at using to communicate. So, there can be a lot of, upfront work for that. But then, as what I love in this career is watching kids grow, and there's nothing better. And he's one of those examples of just making so much growth, even in just a matter of a couple years. And that includes even virtual learning within there. So.
And then my last question, real quick, I'm sorry, because I had a lot of going on over here. I could listen, but I couldn't talk. So anyway, my last question was, what resource do you think you've leaned on the most to get those really out of the box ideas that we might already be feeling intimidated about, even early on in the process? Is there a resource or a class you took or anything that you think that particularly helped you find those more creative solutions?
Before we answer that, I do want to say to your last question, I've read a lot about and experienced in practice that when introduced incrementally to the inclusive setting, and then later when given a choice, what classroom would you like to go to? Do you want to go to this classroom with all your peers and do your work? Would you like to go to this other classroom without them? Like 9 kids out of 10 are choosing to go to the inclusion classroom with all of their peers. And that's all kinds of different kids. And I thought that was really neat that even when given the option between an inclusive classroom that has work in it and then an empty classroom that just has like some toys to engage in and no peers or teachers, or they're choosing to go do work, students are choosing to go do work and be with their peers. So like that's really neat. And so maybe it kind of boils down to like, I'm slowly introducing you to this setting. I'm giving you options and choices. What do you want to do? Kind of learning like what do your students and what do your kids want and need? And I think they might surprise you with what they want.
To answer your second question, Brenna, I personally did not have something that I read that like inspired me. For me, it was personal. My brother was segregated in segregated settings. We didn't know any better. We thought it was right because we trusted the educational team of experts. And I always wanted to be a teacher, but I fought it for a long time. I was like, no, I want to be rich. I want to do something else. And I went to my credential program at UC Santa Barbara, and they really like instilled in us like, here's the data, here are these kids, here's what Jessica's talking about. It works and it's what's right. My brother was still in high school at the time. So that started our journey of advocating for him, and we got him out of the special ed room. We put him in all electives. We didn't necessarily do anything evidence-based or systematic. We just were like, get him out, put him in art. He's junior, just let him have like a social, time at school. He's very, very similar to the student Sarah mentioned earlier. He has Down syndrome. He's also in a wheelchair due to arthrogryposis. He has a communication device. Kids know him and they love him. And he was nominated to prom court and performed in a talent show in front of the whole school. Like that was our biggest, best experience. And that is why I do what I do, because everybody needs to, like, not only did Mikey need this, that's his name, my family needed this. And I think other students did benefit from him. My cousin just brought home a boyfriend to visit my grandma. And the kid goes, hey, Mikey, what's up? So this kid is 2 years younger than my brother, knew him from high school, just being out and about and through art. So like, those are like those magical times. But I think for teachers that are struggling with either wrapping their heads around it or the fear associated with it, I think it's creating a goal and maybe sharing that goal with someone to help you reach it. I was deathly afraid of co-teaching. I wanted to be with my kids. Like there's so much fear for me of like, oh, I have to go to this other classroom and I have to manage different types of behaviors. Cussing, that's not my thing. High schoolers love that. And I made a goal with a teacher and I said, I would like to come observe your class. And I'm going to come like once a week. And they were like, yeah, do it. And then it became like, can I help you? And I'm just like deathly afraid the whole time. But like making those goals with that individual helped me grow, helped me to become more confident. And I think maybe that's where a lot of us get stuck, especially special education teachers. So I don't know if that helped answer your question, but I think it's just a turning point that you commit to incrementally.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for your question. Well, we're getting down to the wire with 4 minutes left. So I'm going to drop again the link to the evaluation form today. We would love all of your comments and feedback. Please let us know what worked, what didn't work, what you're still like need clarification on. And please visit the IPP demonstration site's website. Research says that these one and done sort of presentations don't work. Please further your learning through utilizing some of the tools we've provided. We are more than happy to provide any follow-up support and get you observations or anything you need, resources. So
Yeah,
any,
thank you.
any
I-
final questions? And free to go.
Thank you for putting those links in there.
Thank you guys so much. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Likewise.
You too. Okay.